So we just have to keep riding this roller coaster. And they decided that the best form of treatment after they'd actually taken out his cancer in his throat, which is where he had come the second time, and he ended up losing about a third of his soft palate and his tonsils and you know, somewhat of his throat kind of back to the back of his neck. And they said, you know, we're going to give him a bone marrow transplant because this is the only way that we can think to prevent either cancer coming back. So this wasn't a case of now dealing with the cancer that was present. That was all gone as far as they could see. But what they were worried about was what they couldn't see, you know, harboring around in the bone marrow somewhere. And so they said a bone marrow transplant would be the best way to go. So we agreed. And in March of 2013, Deryn had his first bone marrow transplant in Bristol Children's Hospital. And that came from a German donor, a wonderful man over there who you know, held up and helped him. Sadly, Deryn had a virus called adenovirus. He picked it up in isolation, which is very easy for them to do because they can only isolate a child with no bone marrow, you know, no immune system so well. You know, there's only so much you can do. You can't hermetically seal a room or go in a hazmat suit, you know. So sadly, he picked up adenovirus, and the drugs they were giving for the adenovirus was also completely eradicating the new bone marrow. And it was very much a balancing act to try and eradicate one, but to help flourish, it was horrendous. And so his first bone marrow transplant actually failed. And so they gave him another one from the same donor, but the adenovirus was still there. And again, the same Cidofovir, the drug was, and they kept giving it to him. And of course, it completely failed his second bone marrow transplant.
Oh, poor boy.
Yeah. And at this point, he'd actually had quite a severe case of GVHD, which is graft versus host disease, which is, you know, if we have a liver transplant, our immune system sees the liver and it sees it as a foreign object, so it tries to expel the liver. So we then have to take immunosuppressants to try and, you know, keep the immune system down. Well, of course, his new immune system was somebody else's. So his entire body was a foreign object. And so he had GVHD in his skin, his gut, right from his mouth all the way down to the other end, all the way through his entire system. And so they said to us, you know, look, there probably is no point even trying to go along with the donor anymore because this graft versus host disease is so horrendous for him. So we're going to give him his own cells back. Now, this is when I started looking at nature, because they said to me, they came in the room and they said, we're not going to give him any more treatment for this adenovirus. We're going to give him his own cells back. They're going to take around about 21 to 23 days to start engrafting, which means he makes his own red blood cells. And but we're not going to treat the adenovirus. So you want to hope that the new bone marrow kicks in before the adenovirus gets him. So I suggest you pray. And that's when I kind of had this, okay, I'm going to go on Google, which is the one thing that they told me right back in 2010. Yeah, they said, do not go on the internet. We will tell you everything you need to know. You will only scare yourself. And to be honest, they were right, because at the beginning I kind of did go on there, but I wasn't looking at alternatives back then. I was looking at statistics, and that was the worst thing in the world I could have done. So I don't suggest anybody do that, because your child or you know, your partner, your loved one is not the same as statistic. They're an individual. It's so, you know, everybody's an individual. So statistics, don't bother looking. But this time now I had a different mission in mind, and I just Googled natural alternatives for adenovirus, and it came up with a list as long as my arm: manuka honey, olive leaf extract, echinacea, pau d'arco tea, lipospheric vitamin C. The list went on. So I just went down into town, into Bristol, and I just bought all of this stuff from Holland and Barrett, and I came back and I started giving it to him. And his count at that time, his infection count was 3.2 million. And I got it down to 1,000 within a week and a half. Yeah, just with that. And his bone marrow still hadn't kicked in. So yeah, I managed to get his adenovirus right down to nothing. They were very perplexed, you know, shaking their head, kind of couldn't understand. And I thought, well, nature, you know, it's been around a lot longer than we have.